Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is political unrest in Africa. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about political unrest in Africa the same individual who has talked to this audience on many occasions about a whole variety of important political issues with the Middle East, Africa, South America, and etc. Our own Dr. LMadu. And of course, Dr. LMadu, let me welcome you to the show this morning and tell you how delighted we are again to have you, and to especially be encouraged by the fact that today we're going to talk about not only a current topic, but one that goes way back some 40 years dealing with Libya. And so let's start off by having you give us some kind of assessment in terms of what's going on the continent of Africa today and Libya today.
Well, the most important issue, happening now is the question of Libya. Colonel Gaddafi has been in power since 1969, and this is 42 years now in power. Since Libya really became officially independent, in 1951, it has been ruled by only two leaders: the ex-king Idris Senussi, who was overthrown in '69 by Gaddafi, and Colonel Gaddafi himself. So they've had only two leaders.
Since independence, there have only been two leaders.
Exactly.
42 years.
Yes, since 1951. So since '69, all Libyans have known is Gaddafi. So anybody who is under 40 years old, that's the only leader you ever known. So since '69, his regime has been very erratic. He came in with a 12-member revolutionary council. There were 12 of them who overthrew the king in 1969. And since then, almost half of them have run away into exile, and he has fallen out with the rest. And that's when his regime started crumbling. Because what happened, when he fell out with those he came to power with, what happened? He turned inwards, his children and family. Just the same thing Saddam Hussein did. So he lost focus, really, of where he was heading to. And that in turn did what? Started making people to agitate for more rights. And then what happened? You crack down more on those people. Then they agitate more. So he had to stay in power by repression, not by democratic means or by what he's doing for the people, but, by force. So that's how we came here, today. Libya really is a very small country. Demographically, it's between 6 to 7 million people, which is not much. But in geographical terms, it's really the fourth largest city in Africa. There are almost 700,000 square miles. Only Sudan, Congo, Republic of Congo, and Algeria is larger than Libya. In fact, Libya is always twice the size of Nigeria in area of land, with immense oil, about 50 billion, barrels oil reserve, the largest reserve in Africa, and $100 billion in external reserves in money, and 150 billion in Commonwealth funds that it has. Most of it now has been seized, by the United States government and foreign banks and all that since this confrontation started. Really, the difference between the confrontations in Libya and those in Tunisia and Egypt is that the one in Libya became technically what you call an armed insurrection. In Tunisia and Egypt, they were peaceful demonstrators. Yeah, even when Mubarak tried to provoke them by sending his thugs, they still didn't pick up arms to fight, because that's exactly what Mubarak wanted to do in Egypt. Is inside those people, they start shooting and all that, then he will order the army to crush it, saying it's lawlessness. So that's the mistake those demonstrators did in Libya. When they started, they came out as peaceful, but behind those demonstrators were people with guns. What is happening in Libya now really has been planned originally. They were just waiting for the right time to strike. In 1993, there was a serious challenge to Colonel Gaddafi, led by his army officers from a different ethnic group. He mercilessly, crushed it, and a whole lot of people were executed. Same again, there was a prison riot in a city in northeast, Libya, in which 1,300 prisoners were slaughtered just because they were protesting. So it's on and on and on, civil rights violations and human rights violations. People arrested and they disappear. So this is exactly why the people got fed up. And then last month, in the city of Beda,
And of course, Dr. Moody, let us take this first commercial break, and then we'll pick up at this exact point in reference to the coming of this great tragedy that we are now witnessing. Let me encourage our audience to tune in for the second part of this show. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. LMadu, and the topic is political unrest in Africa. Now, Dr. LMadu, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to pick up where we left off the last time. And so let's talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, so, the accumulated build-up of anger, amongst the Libyan people, gave rise to the uprising that really started in the city of Beda. Beda is in the northeastern part of the country. Ironically, a man called Mohammed Senussi, who is the ancestor of the king, of first king of Libya, started a religious brotherhood in that city a long time ago. So those cities, Beda, Tobruk, and Benghazi in the east, have always been a hotbed of opposition to Colonel Gaddafi from day one. In fact, the last king, King Idris, who was overthrown, really came from that part of the country. And in fact, when he was in power, he was really a king of Cyrenaica, not really of the whole of Libya. Cyrenaica Defense Forces were those who were supposed to be protecting him, not the army of Libya. One would say, well, why do you say, Cyrenaica? Because really, historically, Libya has never been one country. That's one of the maybe few accomplishments of Colonel Gaddafi's, having keep the whole of Libya as one. But when he came to power, technically Libya was three countries. You have Cyrenaica in the east, with the capital in Benghazi. Then you have Tripolitania in the west, with Tripoli. Then you have the Fezzan in the south, where most of the blacks live in Libya. So really, when the Italians came and left, Libya was still really three countries. The British had, a naval and air base in Tobruk. The Americans had one in Willis Air Base. So when Gaddafi came in, he closed all those air bases and drove out the Americans and the British and everybody else. So what happened was that, he started well. But then he started fighting with this 12-member Revolutionary Council he came in with, started quarreling with them. Then Major Abdullah Omar Meheshi, one of those who came in with, was the first to leave and started plotting to overthrow him, in the early 70s. And then he sent in people to assassinate him. Then recently, Major Abdul Salam Jalud, who is number 2, for a long time, for over 20 years, he had a disagreement with him, and he put him under house arrest. Then when this problem started, his cousin, who is probably the third most powerful man in the country, Ahmed Gaddafi Adam, defected to the rebels.
Okay.
The Minister of Interior, Major General Abdul Fattah Yunis El Obedi, defected. His Minister of Justice, Mustafa Jalil, also defected. And most of his ambassadors, all defected. So what is happening now is that all those former members of his council who have defected now are leading, the rebel army, from Benghazi. On this side, Gaddafi's army is being led by his son, Kamis, who commands the crack, called Kamis Brigade. They are the ones who are really responsible for this fighting. Now, we've been hearing about mercenaries, Gaddafi recruiting mercenaries and all this. And that's why there's a kind of anti-black sentiment in Libya now, which they are calling, Libyan racism towards blacks, because they see those black folks that they are fighting for Gaddafi. But actually, they are not mercenaries, in the real sense of it. A lot of them have benefited from Colonel Gaddafi personally. Now, in 1972, he formed what he called the Islamic Legion. A lot of these poor folks from sub-Saharan Africa, from Mali, Upper Volta, that's called Burkina Faso now, Chad, Niger, all of them.
Black Africa.
Exactly, enlisted, Sudan enlisted in that Islamic army. And that's the army he used to fight the Chadian government in the 70s when he tried to seize a place called the Azu Strip in Chad. In 1987, when the Chadian army, rolled back, Gaddafi's army, he dissolved this legion, and all of them went their way. That's one element. The second element is those blacks who live in southern Chad, called the Tuaregs, and the Tubus, some of them are in Chad, also, joined his army. Because when the Tuaregs were being harassed by the governments in Mali that they are fighting against, Gaddafi welcomed them. So they became citizens and joined his army. So these are the people that are seen, that call him mercenaries.
Mercenaries, but these are actually folks from...
Exactly. Yeah. Some of them live in Libya, and some of them from South Saharan Africa who have tribal affiliations with those people. Third, you have those who live in Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Sudan that have benefited financially from Gaddafi. Since he came to power, he has been building mosques, hospitals, schools in those poor parts of Africa that have none before. In fact, the government secretariat in Bamako, Mali, is being funded by Colonel Gaddafi. In Uganda, he has built mosques in Uganda, in Niger, in Chad, in Darfur, all these places. So these guys see him as their benefactor. Exactly. Where they will have no hospital, they have one because of him. Where they won't have schools, they have one because of him. So a lot of them are rushing to join his army because they believe they're fighting for their own interests. And not the way we see it. We see it as mercenaries. But they believe if he goes, they lose the little they have. That's why Gaddafi has this 150 billion sovereign fund that he uses to do all this.
To keep himself in power.
Exactly. That's why these people are fighting. Some of these black folks, from sub-Saharan Africa, and the Tubus and Tuaregs, those who live in southern Libya, because he has benefited them too. You see, so that's very important to understand. Now, the governments of Africa, most of them have not criticized him. It's because of some of these things that's why
he's also funded.
Exactly, has funded a lot of their own regimes and all that. And in fact, 15% of the dues of the African Union, Libya pays it. You see, so a lot of them have reason to keep quiet because their own populations have benefited, and they wouldn't want their governments condemning him. And secondly, a lot of them too have been in power for a long time, 20, 30 years, and so they don't don't have any grounds to start
talk about a 40-year.
Exactly, talk about his government. So it's better to keep quiet. You know, that's why the AU has not taken any resolution or vote on that issue, because it's not something they will agree upon. Now, what is the military, outcome? Today, the United Nations, Security Council passed a resolution, imposing a no-fly zone over Libya. And in a way, this is, tantamount to a declaration of war, because it will involve bombing nuclear sites.
Let's take this last commercial break, Dr. Madu, and pick up at that exact point when we come back. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to this final segment of the show for today. The topic is political unrest in Africa, and the guest is Dr. LMadu. Now, Dr. LMadu, this is the final segment here, and let's give you an opportunity during this final segment to sort of bring things together in reference to Libya and talk about the United States, well, however you wish to deal with it.